Good evening and welcome to an episode of Meet the Populace. My name is Lady Vinkatavyani and I'm your host. Tonight we're welcoming Master Alan Fairfax as a guest on our show. Good evening, Master Alan, and thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. And I usually go by Fairfax. That's probably the first place to start, but yeah.
Okay, so why don't you tell us about that? Why do you go by Fairfax?
This will probably answer a couple other questions that are on the list. I started in the society in 1987 in Stormvale, which is Flint, Michigan, which at the time was on the edge of the known world. There wasn't any group north of us, really. Not that we could drive to. You could to Alaska or something. So it was at a store that mostly sold Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing game stuff. And they just handed me a binder with a list of about 10,000 names in it, just in a row. And I opened up to F randomly and started looking, and I went, Fairfax, that looks good. And probably could have stuck with it, so I ended up becoming a herald, which was it still is a big part of my activity, but for a long time was pretty much all I did. And generally, if you're being a herald, you should have a name you can pass. And so I eventually just added my mundane first name, Alan, onto it. And I had a surname, it was Alarickson, which is Fairfax Alarickson would not pass even in 1987. And so I ended up modifying it. But yeah, so I go generally, from way back, have been Fairfax.
Okay, so it was through that gaming store that you discovered the SCA?
Sort of. I was reading a science fiction anthology. I was about 10 years old. And I was reading this science fiction anthology that Isaac Asimov put together. And he introduced one section. He said, the next three authors all share the same unusual hobby. And he explained the SCA because it was Poul Anderson and Diana Paxson and I don't know, somebody else. And I was like 10. I said, that sounds like the best thing I've ever heard of. That's incredible. And about 4 years later, I was 14 and found this gaming store had a newsletter, and on the back of it, it said, the Society for Creative Anachronism meets here Sunday at 7. And so I literally walked in, because it was within walking distance. I couldn't drive or anything. Mm-hmm. And for years, I was one of the very, very few teenagers who showed up at SCA events, which has a lot to do with a lot of things that happened after that for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's been a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I'll stress I was very, very young.
Well, you know what? Get them young and train them up right.
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. So, and it did have a big influence on my life in a lot of ways because they didn't have any kind of youth program. And so I was kind of allowed to jump in and do the same things everybody else was doing, and so I autocrated a small event when I was 17.
Oh, wow.
And a much more significant one when I was 18, and was the Branch Herald once I was old enough to sign, and so those people, the people in those groups, and it was also the college group I went to, after that, where I got a chance to do a lot of leadership and interaction with real grown-ups that really affected how I was able to mature.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty amazing that you did so much so young and then just threw yourself right into it.
Yeah, kids get excited by things. And for me, I think looking back, I realized it's more impressive that the people I was around were willing to let me do it. So
that actually, it speaks a lot to your character as well, and to your character at the time in your youth. So it was very impressive. Maybe we'll see more than that. You'll inspire more of that.
Hopefully.
So where about in the known world do you play?
I'm still in Michigan, which is Penamere, a little farther south. I'm like past Detroit in the suburbs. And so, which counts as the barony of Cinnabar, which is a pretty good sized group. And
there's some pretty amazing people in Cinnabar.
Yeah, it's a very, very, we've got 2 dukes, if I'm not forgetting anybody, and a bunch of other people. Yeah, it's a lot. We actually had our own, for a while, Cinnabar was having its own Laurel meetings because there were so many people we could get together and hang out.
Oh, wow. Okay, so from that time when you were younger, do you remember your first actual event
Oh,
that you
vividly,
attended? And
vividly.
well, what do you remember the most about it? Tell me about it.
Well, it was a collegium, which is basically a rum before there was rum, which is the Royal University. So, a big event with a lot of A&S classes.
Hmm.
I remember going to a dance class and learning that the person who offered to dance with me held the exalted office of baronial seneschal, which sounded really impressive to me. I actually was really taken by, like, the king was Eliyahu, who's one of the dukes in Cinnabar now. He's still around, and I remember being really into court even at my very first event, which tells you I'm a nerd from the get-go. But and I went to a class taught by Duke Talimar, who's kind of a legendary figure, I guess, although if he's listening, that'll embarrass him. The part was funny. It was a storytelling class, and I've actually I still tell the story that he told in the class at the first event I ever went to, because it's just that good.
So share the story.
Oh, it's online. It's too long for the length of the video.
Okay.
And it's online already. There's more than one place where the Midrealm has a bardic performance archive.
Okay.
And so it's actually Master Andreas, who I know you've also talked to, has helped to maintain that. And so, yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Well, I will go see if I can find it when we're done here.
Yeah.
So
I'll send you a link to it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I will also put that link in the comments when I post this video so that others can find it too.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to ask for an edit though. It's Master Kyrian who's kept that archive going. I want to make sure I credit properly.
Okay.
Sorry.
Master Kyrian.
Yeah. Anyway.
So we were talking earlier and about some of the questions that I usually ask, and one of them that you had expressed an interest in was, tell us something that you have actually learned in the SCA, whether that is a skill or a life lesson. So let's go ahead and talk about that.
Well, it's kind of the lesson. I started to allude to it, talking about the experience. When I talk about the fact that the opportunities I got, I think, reflected on the people who were around me. It didn't take me long to figure out that 14-year-old me was not the obvious candidate for future leader. And, I remember meeting, I just met so many people who are not in situations where outside the SCA, they're going to be given the chance to move into positions where they're doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I really value about the SCA is that the group that in the form that it was in, it's a place where anybody can come in and push themselves and take on to do the things they really want to do that maybe in the world outside they're not allowed to. And I think part of the challenge of the SCA is that as we have so many more people who have so much more experience, it's harder to break in. And I think that's one of it's the downside of success. But in the positive, if you come in, and I still see this, if you come in and you're not going to you're going to be judged on the value of what you're doing more than in most organizations. And that's something that I've carried with me into a lot of the work I do outside of the SCA, to not assume that I know what people's limitations are because of, where they fit into society as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good lesson, and it's a really good thing about the SCA is that, yes, anybody gets an equal shot to do things, to be officers, and there's always somebody there to help support them. So we love that.
Yeah, and sometimes those people become the support,
So in all this time that you've been with us, and I know, I hear a lot, there's a lot, but is there any one person that really quick comes to mind that has just firmly impacted you and your journey in the SCA?
Oh, I feel like if I pick one person, then I'm not picking the other people. I think I'm going to mention Master Nigelis LaHaye, who is when I said I went to a group which was theoretically a college group, but most of the people had graduated. And he and his wife, Lady Catherine, were I guess Baroness Catherine. I think about these things. Anyway, they had formed the group, and because they were 2 years older than everybody else, they were kind of in charge. And
2 years.
I know. They were like, and for me being, coming in at like 16, these were like real grown-up people around. It was, they were like 25. Yeah, I know. So the whole experience was, they set a tone. He and Kathy together set a tone for the group that was just unrelentingly positive. One of the rules was, if you criticize someone's work, you're volunteering to take over for them.
Ooh.
Yeah, and that was an established policy that if you're in a meeting, especially, but even in private, we remind, do you want to autocrat that event next year? And the thing was, if you said yes, that was okay. It wasn't designed just to shut people up, but it was like, okay, if you want to do it better, take it, And Nigel and Kathy are both people where they don't say a lot. And so when they did say something, just people listened, and I'm not a quiet person. And so it was helpful for me to see the advantage of that, and also I mentioned Nelson, not Nigel, out of all the people, because I was out of the SCA for about, I guess, 8 or 9 years. And he was one of the few people who really made a dedicated effort to stay in touch during that time. And so I always valued that too.
That's, and that's really awesome, to have somebody that remembers you from this great big family that we have and that actively works to keep in touch with you. Then you're loved and missed.
Yeah, and that was important. He wasn't the only one, but yeah.
Well, so you touched on it a little bit earlier about storytelling. You've gone to a storytelling class and you have this story that you tell over and over again. Okay, but we are an organization of storytellers. We love sharing stories, whether it's an actual fable or whether it's a "this happened to me" or an "oh no, there I was" story.
Mm-hmm.
So when you find yourself telling stories, to other people to make them laugh or something memorable or heartwarming, what is a story that you like to tell over and over again?
I think, well, you're going to get me to tell that one anyway, aren't you?
It's family friendly.
No, it is totally family friendly.
Okay. Well, it doesn't have, like I said, it doesn't have to be your fable story. It can be something that happened to you.
I think in terms of, when I think, there's so many, I'll tell a short one that I think captures, and this is something that I'm not the only person who would remember, but it really stuck out in my mind. There was a Penzic, I don't know, somewhere in the early to mid 20s. So, 25 years ago, maybe. I don't remember the one where the Woods battle ended with the center pole, the center flag, in dispute. And they had a big discussion about who should get the credit for the point, and they eventually gave it to the East. And so the King of the East went and had more conversation, and some people from way back remembered that this had happened back at like Penzic 10 or somewhere, and based on the decision that precedent, it should have been given to the middle.
Okay.
We find this out when he comes into court in the middle of Midrealm Court, which was in what's now the Cooper, the store, which at that time was where court was held, and comes in with his whole retinue, and comes forward and asks to speak to the king, and we don't know what he's going to do, and so he gets up and he addresses that they've consulted the ancient records and he's spoken with the wisest counselors of his kingdom, and they have determined that in reality it's the Midrealm who should receive this point. And so he was coming to officially concede the Woods battle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was just such a great, one of the things I liked about it, because I'm really, my main field is history and research, is that he made the effort to present it in the way that it should sound if you had that issue come up. And so it was a moment where it was very SCA and it was also very medieval all at the same time. And it happened in court, which of course I like. So
It was one of those magic moments.
It was a magic moment. Yeah, and it brought everything together. You know, not just the not just the history, but the values, I guess, that we try to be about. So
when you really feel the dream.
Yeah. So that has always stuck with me.
So, in your activities in the SCA, what do you gravitate to?
So my natural gravitation, so partly because when I started in the SCA, there was no youth combat at all. So fighting, even though I was, 14-year-old boy, and that hitting people with sticks sounds good, that was completely off the table. So I started doing heraldry very early, like at my second meeting. I'm reading, the Fox Davies was the book that they handed you to learn heraldry back then. And I got really, really involved in heraldry for a long time. There was a group called the Academy of St. Gabriel, which was designed to help people do more serious, not serious, name research beyond will it pass. But if somebody says, I'm from Scotland in 1300, what form of my name do I use for that century as opposed to 1000? And so I started that group, which ran for a number of years, and I think really upped the level, not so much because of what I did, but the people who came into it kind of really upped the standard for documentation for names. And, so that's something that was significant. But I was really bad at paperwork. So my Pelican, I was protéged. My Pelican said, "You're really an A&S person." Which obviously turned out to be true. So I went from being a protege to an apprentice and really focused on research, not just in heraldry, but even more in religious studies and medieval Christianity. And so probably, that's the thing that I really get into the most is research. And the nature of research is you can use it to learn about anything. So kind of my favorite thing to do is to find, when somebody says there's this thing and I can't get any information about it, and I'll help them dig in and find stuff that they don't know is out there. And yeah, so it's always been I say that, and then part of the challenge is that I really love the dream, fake titles, non-period system, completely made up stuff that we have that makes up the SCA. And so even though I now know that most of what we're doing in court has really very little to do with the Middle Ages, all of that stuff still speaks to me very deeply. And so I have this I really like the authenticity side of it, but I don't know if it's the fun side, but the pageantry and the societyness of the society, the stuff we made up. Also,
magic that is unique to the SCA.
Yes, unique to the SCA and bearing no relationship to the Middle Ages in any really significant way. Yeah, I love that. I love all that stuff too. So.
Well, you know what? I think that's one of the highlights is the magic that is unique, and that keeps the romance alive for a lot of us.
The romance is a good word because that's exactly that's the perfect term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting near the end of our time, so I've got one last question that I'm gonna let you ponder a little bit on, and that is, what would you like other people to learn from the SCA?
Most of all, I think the key is to be accepting of other people who are not like you, which means to be willing to accept that when somebody's doing something in a way that seems weird, to let them be weird, and that applies on a lot of different levels. I think when I look at any peerage order, the people who are in it, often there are people in that group who often really don't get each other very well, but they all represent kind of a facet of something bigger. And I think that's true of the SCA, that anybody can, not everybody does bring something unique. And what I love about the SCA is that it's more willing to let people bring their unique gift to the table, which helps the us as a group, but it also helps the people who are in those places to grow and to do things that they probably didn't think they were capable of. And having started so young, that's something that's very close to me.
It is important to celebrate our differences. Differences
Mm-hmm.
are what make us fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time this evening. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. You
And
too.
thank you, everybody, for tuning in once again for Meet the Populace. If you would like to contact Meet the Populace, please send your email to the email address at the bottom of your screen. And thank you once again, Master Alan Fairfax. It's been a true pleasure and an honor.
Thank you.